Okay, we are live, but we got to let it breathe just for a moment here. We'll get things cooking on this Thursday evening in Broncos country, or as John Elway would call it, Bronco land. We all remember this. Bring on Instagram, Facebook, and we are right as rain. Welcome in, everybody. It's the Mile High Huddle podcast. I'm your host, Chad Jensen. With me, my fellow football priest. You know him, you love him, Zack Kelberman. Zack, it's the 11th of July. We are steadily marching closer to Broncos training camp, which really doesn't kick off till the 26th, even though you got rookies reporting a week prior and you got the vets reporting 3 days before. But still, we're on the home stretch, it feels like, my dog.
Yeah, I said that to you earlier, Chad. I was writing up a story about the Broncos Mount Rushmore. You were writing up a story about this, which we'll talk about the three-team scenario. I'm like, man, training camp can't come any faster, can it? Until we get real news and real information. And I pray for that moment, Chad. I pray for that day.
Well, let's just to kind of get the conversation going here for a second. Let's talk about the NFL's official Twitter or X account revealing their Broncos Mount Rushmore, which, as you write, is, of course, a who's who of the most iconic players in franchise history. Here's your Mount Rushmore, guys. We want to hear your thoughts. Only 4 people can be on this Mount Rushmore. They're trying to keep it strict. Oh, no. Why does it do that? John Elway, Terrell Davis, Shannon Sharp, Von Miller. That is your Mount Rushmore. And I think, Zack, for what it's worth, I think it's a pretty fair representation. A lot of people will pick nits in it, but what were your thoughts on it?
I think it's there's so many great players that have come through the doors in Denver. It's hard to narrow it down to 4. I mean, Elway and Vaughn are locks. We know that, Chad. So the discussion starts at TD, who I think gets it because 2,000-yard rusher. He's so iconic, and he carried them to a Super Bowl. Then Shannon Sharp. You can go Atwater. You can go Champ Bailey. You can go Mecklenburg. You can go a lot of different ways with that selection. That's the one that I think was the controversial one, but at least 2 out of the 4 were slam dunks to me.
Who? Terrell Davis, you think, was the
No,
controversy?
Shannon Sharp.
Shannon Sharp. Oh, yeah. Yeah, but I understand it, dude. Like there were guys that came before him in terms of like NFL tight ends producing at like prolific levels. I mean, Ozzie Newsome. But Shannon Sharp like single-handedly revolutionized tight end and won 2 Super Bowls as a Bronco. So again, it's hard to pick nits in it because it's like, when you ask a parent, who are do you have any favorite kids? It's like, no, I love them all. Like they're all my favorite. Kind of like that. Like you could go Shannon Sharp. Okay, Shannon Sharp, Terrell Davis, Von Miller, John Elway. Guys you could throw in, you mentioned Peyton Manning. I mean, it's pretty hard not to put Manning there, but he was only here, 4 seasons. So it's understandable if that disqualifies him, whereas he got 14 years in Indy. I digress. Champ Bailey, strong argument, never won anything. I mean, he won games, don't get me wrong, but unfortunately, Zack, his one shot at the big ring, the Broncos got humiliated at MetLife Stadium. So that detracts from some of the other more deserving, I would argue, defenders like Steve Atwater, who won it all, Hall of Fame. It's fun. I guess it's appropriate off-season fodder, Zack.
Exactly. That's what I wrote. I mean, it makes for a good talk in July, a good debate to have until training camp starts. And it's also a good problem to have, Chad. There's some teams out there that the Mount Rushmore is pretty clear cut and there's no debate. The fact that there's debate about it means that the Broncos have had so many legendary players that we can't really narrow them down to just 4.
We don't have to do that at MHH. The MHH Mount Rushmore has many a visage etched in those rocky surfaces, whatever you want to call it. This is one of them. We got the Papa Bear, David McElrath, every single night. He's here. And more often than not, probably 9 times out of 10, first super chat of every single night, starting us off on the right foot. And you have no idea how important that is and how much it means to Zach and I and Scott. It's very, very important. Thank you, bro. Saying good evening to everybody. Courtland Sutton isn't going anywhere. And Zach, let's just talk about it. I agree with you, David, for what it's worth. I don't think he's going anywhere. But this CBS Sports, Cody Benjamin, again, it's July 11th, so why not? But Zach, his proposal, he had an article proposing some Brandon Ayuk trades. And one of the third and last one involved the Broncos sending Courtland Sutton to San Francisco Ayuk goes to Washington, and then the Commanders send Jamison Crowder to the Broncos. The Broncos also get a third-round pick out of it. I'm trying to remember what else. San Francisco, I think a second-round pick they got out of Washington. So it's just kind of like three-team trade. It's again, Zach, more than anything, it's fodder. The more you actually study the Courtland Sutton holdout, and I'll say holdout because he didn't hold out from anything he was absolutely required to be at. The more it seems like actually he had the team's blessing for what it's worth. But what were your thoughts on the trade? And we'll get to Taylor here too.
Well, I asked myself a couple questions when it comes to Brandon Ayuk. Number one, I know he's a very talented receiver, but will he be as good outside San Francisco, playing outside of that supporting cast, outside of the Shanahan system? I don't know. Number two, he's going to want and get a huge, huge contract. Where is that money coming from with the Broncos? They shed salary for that reason to not pay into one position. And number three, would you really want to acquire a receiver who just forced his way out of one of the best situations in the league? You don't need those type of bad apples with the culture that Sean Payton's trying to build. You're trying to go through a developmental year, more than likely with a rookie quarterback, a lot of young players. They're not a win now team, Chad. Their window's not open yet. If they were, I'd say go for it. But if the fact that they're not, you have Courtland Sutton, you have some younger guys in that receiving core you want to get the reps to. It's a hard pass for me.
Taylor jumping in, and looks like he's a proud owner of a brand new, I think it's Midnight Blue, I think they call it, Broncos Knicks jersey. Says, hey guys, I don't want Jamison Crowder. Plus, he's older and less talented. Just extended Courtland Sutton and get this done with. He deserves a few million after 10 tutties. Yeah, so I mean, for what it's worth, based on reports, he's only looking for it's something like 2.5 to 3.5 million more per year. But Zach, if you go back and you look at some of the things that Sean Payton said early in the offseason, cut to some of the things Courtland Sutton said on the final day of mandatory minicamp, as it turned out. Well, first day, of mandatory minicamp. Of course, we learned, Zach, he had off-season ankle surgery, right? So if you're the Denver Broncos, who also we learned from Courtland Sutton, advised him, hey, go see this guy. We trust this guy down in Florida to kind of oversee your rehab from the ankle surgery. So he obliged. He did what they asked. That's where he went. He spent time down in Florida. And then Sean Payton, meanwhile, he's saying, yeah, it's nothing to worry about. Yeah, it's nothing to worry about. Everybody else, of course, we're freaking out because he's a key player. It's Courtland Sutton. Why isn't he there, etc.? But it kind of, Zach, seems like it almost has been according to plan. Now, there is the small matter of the little pay raise bump that he's looking for after the 10 tutties, as Taylor's saying here. When push finally comes to shove, and of course that'll happen right around deadline time, meaning training camp, I think they'll make him feel the love.
Well, we had a couple stories lately about Brandon Ayuk. I know in this story, Chad, in the three-team scenario, Jamison Crowder would be coming to Denver. So I covered Brandon Ayuk. Crowder, he's not the same type of receiver as a Courtland Sutton. So why would you want to swap one out and you're not even getting the same return? He's more of a Marvin Mims, Troy Franklin type. Well, you have Marvin Mims and Troy Franklin. They're younger. You've invested in them. Troy Franklin has the chemistry down with Bo Nix already. I always default back to this, Chad. Get the younger guys the action. Get the younger guys the reps. Don't bring in any more vets at a position where you don't need any. Courtland Sutton, the ankle you mentioned, well, he's participating in Jarrett Stidham's throwing camp or whatever in Dallas. So obviously the ankle's okay. He's being a team player there. He showed up to mandatory minicamp. Whether the Broncos oblige him or not, he's still your number one receiver. So going out and trading a number one for a number 2 or 3 in Crowder makes just zero sense to me.
The Ronk jumping in. Love you, big dog. Great to see you tonight, Mike. Saying good evening, Chad and Zach on the Mile High Huddle podcast. Much love and respect. So good to see you. Some shouts from Arnold Serrano jumping in with a super chat. He's wanting to pick some nits here on his version of the Mount Rushmore. Elway, Miller, Sharp, Bailey. So he's taking off TD, putting in Champ, and to each his own. You know, this is one of those things, guys, and Arnold, where the beauty is in the eye of the beholder. I think nobody is ever going to take Elway and Miller off the Mount Rushmore. But those other 2 spots, you know, they're open for debate. They're open for discussion. And I don't begrudge you choosing either of those guys to be the other 2, Arnold.
Yeah, this is why I said earlier, only because I wrote the article based around the Twitter responses I got to the Mount Rushmore, that the only debatable ones were Shannon Sharp and TD. I mean, I agree with the original list, but again, the fact that we can debate swapping one for another legend is a really good situation for the mystique of the franchise.
Indeed. Real quick, some shouts on Instagram. Great to see everybody over there. Peyton Ends is saying, Bo Nix going to the Hall of Fame. Highlander 17, what's up, bro? Saying, hey, dudes, good to see you again live. Hashtag MHH for life. Sheesh 26, have a great show, fellas. I'll be rewatching tomorrow. And you got to forgive us if we don't. You know, a lot of times, Zach, these Instagram handles, you think it's hard trying to keep like YouTube handles and Twitter handles straight. It's even more difficult with Instagram handles. So if I don't know exactly who you are, sheesh, it seems like I should know. You've like declared who you are. I can't remember. But looking forward to seeing you in the chat. Sam Bam, bro, what's up? Always great having another legendary Mount Rushmore member in the conversation. And tonight it's Sam Bam saying, evening, guys, go Broncos. Thank you, buddy. Really appreciate you. You know, some other names to float out there, Zach, as far as Mount Rushmore contenders that we have not touched on quite yet. I would also submit Rod Smith as a guy to consider. You know, it'd be easy to say Demaryius Thomas, because of the recency bias, the late DT, RIP DT. Nothing I'm saying here detracts from that. But Rod Smith, still the Broncos' all-time leading receiver. And even though DT got close, had himself some prolific years, garnered more Pro Bowls and All-Pros for what it's worth than Rod Smith, he didn't quite get to him in stats. And 1 Super Bowl ring for DT, 2 Super Bowls for Rod Smith. So I don't know. Rod Smith's a guy I still, man, like he's a guy, honestly, should be in the Hall of Fame. If that dude was a first-round pick in the NFL draft the year he came out, he would be in the Hall of Fame. The only reason he's not in the Hall of Fame is because he was undrafted, which is a great travesty.
We're on the topic of receiver. One of the shouts I got on Twitter was Ed McCaffrey. And again, just because the Broncos, I know it's a stretch, but another, iconic player in franchise history. One I do agree with that wasn't brought up by us yet, Chad, is Floyd Little. I mean, how do you tell the story about the Broncos and their inception without mentioning Floyd Little? True. If anyone would have a case to make the 4th spot instead of Shannon Sharp, I think it would be Floyd.
That's true. They called him the franchise for a reason. And one of my most prized possessions that was gifted to me by one of my mentors in this business and in life, to be frank, just generally speaking, Doc Bear, hooked me up a few years back, hooked me up with a signed Floyd Little football, with the silver Sharpie. It's dope. I should have it displayed, but it's not quite yet. It will be sooner than later. Phil, bro, down in Tucson, proves every single night that Broncos country is not a geographic location. It's a state of being. And he's jumping in, Phil, to say good evening. Got to put Floyd Little up there. Some say there is no Broncos without him. Yes. Hashtag Buckham, MHH for life, Broncos for life. Love it, dude. Yeah, there's an argument to be made. The only thing about that is, like, it depends on how you measure worthiness for the MHH or the Broncos, Mount Rushmore, Zach. Because if it comes down to just like, is it overall impact? Is it individual statistics? Is it contributions to team, success or destiny, or is all those things? I think it has to be kind of all those things have to be factored in. And in that case, as much as Floyd Little is, you could say without Floyd Little, maybe the Broncos don't even stay in Denver. There's an argument to be made there. Still, when it comes to like the most prolific dudes that moved the needle, I don't know. Even as I'm talking about it, I start like doubting myself. Floyd Little, hard to argue it, but I do understand why he wouldn't be listed on the Mount Rushmore.
There's one more factor too, and that's name recognition, kind of like Pro Bowl voting. So 3 out of the 4, all 4 of the Mount Rushmore choices, Chad, the casual fan has heard of. Shannon Sharp, he has, a popular show now, obviously John Elway, Terrell Davis, and Von Miller. But if you ask the casual fan, and maybe even some casual Broncos fans who Floyd Little is, a lot of them would say, I don't know, who is that? Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I mean, that's the early inception parts of the franchise, and they should have been represented, but I can understand why he was omitted.
Yeah, indeed. Mike Edel, another Mount Rushmore OG jumping in. So good to see you tonight, Mike, saying good evening, gentlemen, and a very generous super chat. Thank you, bro. Good evening, gentlemen of Broncos country. Mike says, the only part that bothers me with Sutton is the contract he signed was a pretty lucrative contract at the time that he signed it. And then he gives his Mount Rushmore: Elway, Miller, Manning, Mike Shanahan. Very interesting throwing a coach in. And if you're going to throw a coach in, throw in the winningest coach of all time. Do you get those 2 rings without Shanahan? Obviously, no. You don't have, you probably, at least not at that point in Broncos canon, that's not where you finally break the ice and get the Super Bowl monkey off your back. But yes, Zach, there is a point here that Sutton, at the time, he signed a lucrative contract. Yes, Phil, but even then at the time, we can go back and look at the reporting on it, but it was a relatively, and it's a small asterisk, but it's an asterisk nonetheless, team-friendly deal. He did take maybe slightly less than what he could have gotten if he would have waited 2 months and hit the open market, because he was an in-season extension, Zach. Broncos made him feel the love. He took the money, stuck around. He probably could have gotten a little bit more than that in free agency.
Well, number one, forget the Mount Rushmore. Let's get Mike Shanahan in the Pro Football Hall of Fame. I think it's past time for that, Chad.
Word. Yep.
Number two, with Courtland Sutton, you're right. It wasn't a back-breaking Christian Kirk type deal when Sutton signed it. But again, a year later, or even less than a calendar year later, him and Tim Patrick both restructured that deal to free up some extra salary cap money for the Broncos. So I'm more in Sutton's corner than not here. I think he's playing his cards right, showing to be a team player, showing up for practice and the passing camp. And if he wants a couple extra $1.5 million or whatever, Chad, just float it to him. Keep him happy for the season.
Exactly. I'm with you that, hey, it's not having proven Pro Bowlers at every spot in the wide receiver core is not a huge deal. I mean, obviously I'm being hyperbolic here, but just the fact that you've got kind of a key guy, a veteran, Courtland Sutton, and then outside of Tim Patrick, mostly a lot of younger, unproven guys that need to kind of come up and rise. And that's okay, because that's what you're doing. Let these young guys grow with your young quarterback. Everybody understands, look, the expectations, Zach, are always going to remain high for the Denver Broncos and the fans and the media. Always it's going to be high. But they need the time with Bo Nix to just like let him grow, let him develop that chemistry, let him kind of go through the crucible, the trial by fire. And as he's going through that, if you were right in your evaluation, Sean Payton, and he turns out to be the ideal guy for you, man, he will be that tide that raises all ships. Just like any franchise quarterback in the league, all of a sudden you got guys. I mean, think of the names in Houston. You didn't even know who those names were last year, Zach, when the season started. Let's face it. CJ Stroud changed that, and that's what a true franchise quarterback can do. Just like when Peyton Manning came here. Now, I get it. He's, the 800-pound gorilla. He's the the unicorn. They come very few and far between. It's hard to find them. But, Zach, when Peyton Manning landed here, Demaryius Thomas hadn't achieved much. He had a killer highlight in that in that Broncos Steelers wild card game, right? The to the house 80-yard touchdown in overtime to seal things. But from a statistics and like a consistency perspective, yes, he was a former first-round pick, so his name was known out there, but he had not achieved, I want to say at that point, I don't have it right in front of me, but you could Google it while I'm talking, Zach, less than 600 yards per season in the couple of years he'd been in the league. Eric Decker, also former third-round pick, even fewer, even less production. Julius Thomas, who? Peyton Manning comes here, and all of a sudden these are household names. That's what a franchise quarterback can do. So I'm not too worried about the young wide receiver core. The key here, Zach, get Bo Nix on the field ASAP, so that that's no guarantee he's going to develop into one of these guys that is a franchise guy that raises the ships. But the best way to increase the probability is get him on the field sooner than later, and I think you'll be pleased.
This is why I'm in like the camp of rejecting all these trade scenarios involving Courtland Sutton. Say what you want about him, whether you like him or not. He is the Broncos' best receiver. He has a year in the Sean Payton system already. And I think he might not produce the same amount of touchdowns, or he might still, Chad, but I guarantee with stable quarterback play from Bo Nix, his targets will go up, his catches will go up, and his receiving yards will go up. So there's a lot of incentive for Courtland Sutton to stay put too, Chad, and have a good season.
Totally true. Okay, let's see what George says for his Mount Rushmore. Floyd Little, John Elway, Champ Bailey, Von Miller. That's his Mount Rushmore. That's a solid one. He's including Floyd, though, the franchise, as they called him back in the day, the late Floyd. Little, who is no longer with us. Sam Bam jumping in again. Thank you, bro. Love you. He says, what kind of role do you see Marvin Mims Jr. having potentially with Bo Nix? A typical possession receiver or more of a return man gadget receiver like a Debo Samuel? I think he's one of those guys, Zach, that if you can get him the ball early in a snap, right? Like, not so much a gadget guy, but if you can get him the ball early, I mean, obviously we've seen Zach what he can do with that long speed, right? He can blow right by. There will be plenty of opportunities for that, but I don't think that's the only thing the Broncos will have to hang their hat on relative to Mims. I think if you can get your screen game going, utilize his twitch and his underneath stuff, it's just a matter of guys who can read the field, be that extension of the play caller on the field. That's just something Sean Payton and Russell Wilson, they just had kind of, we talk about a language barrier or a cultural barrier or whatever. They had some kind of a language barrier there where Russell Wilson was just not simply sharing a brain with his head coach. And Sean Payton, even outside of Drew Brees, he's used to having the quarterbacks he's got that are on that grass that are sharing a brain with him. And just someone who sees the field, knows where the ball's supposed to go, isn't going to freak out at a blitz, etc. That's another tide that's going to raise ships. So I see Marvin Mims actually having a pretty big role on offense this year, Zach. And again, though, it's contingent, in my opinion, on Bo Nix seeing the field sooner than later.
Yeah, I agree. I don't think he fits the mold to be a possession receiver, and I think he's way more than a gadget guy. So I'm going to split the difference here, and I'll give you another example. Not so much Debo Samuel, but Devontae Smith from Philadelphia. They're almost the same height. They have the same attributes, and he's going to be the Devontae Smith to Courtland Sutton's A.J. Brown. Sutton and Brown are possession guys, and they're the Robins to their Batmans are not. So I see him hopefully being a starter, taking hold, knock wood, of that number 2 receiver spot, and keeping defenses honest, using him over the middle of the field, taking the top off defenses. And then when you throw in, Chad, Troy Franklin in there, and you throw some of the other receiving threats they have, it really makes things interesting. But it starts with Mims on the outside, taking some attention away, and when the ball is thrown to him, catching it and holding on to it, not fumbling it.
I mean, imagine, Zach, how your outlook, or anyone's outlook, including the national perspective that is still highly, highly skeptical of this roster, how their outlook would change if it on this receiving core, if it was a Drew Brees. Like, let's just pretend Drew Brees was playing for the Broncos right now. Everybody be like rushing to make sure they're getting Marvin Mims no later than round 2 in their fantasy draft. And, they'd be earmarking Troy Franklin as a dark horse for 1,000.
If he was even CJ Stroud, Chad, who you mentioned, to be the same thing.
So all we need here, and this is makes it sound obviously a lot easier than what it is, but you just need that trigger man. And so once again, it all boils down. Did the Broncos, go ahead, Scott, sorry, bro. Did the Broncos make the right decision on April 25th? We got Broncos 007 jumping in for some football espionage. Watch your back, because he does have a license to ill. All right. He says, I know it's questionable if Sutton stays, but I feel like we have the potential to have Sutton and Franklin be like Brown and Smith from the Eagles. Same body types and positions. Either way, I think we have a ton of potential, and that is exactly true, Zach.
I swear to God, Broncos 007, I did not see that comment before I made my comment, but you are spot on here. And Chad, you're spot on too. You don't necessarily have an established Jalen Hurts, which Brown and Smith have in Philly. If Bo Nix can develop into that level of quarterback, then they can be as explosive. And what they have that Philly doesn't have is Sean Payton at the controls, calling the plays.
True. And by the way, Broncos 007. Great to see you. Thank you for the very generous super chat tonight, my friend. And excellent comment. And yeah, that's the thing is, I referenced him earlier when we were talking about Floyd Little and the football I got that's signed by Floyd Little. But Doc Bear, he talks about, hey, look, the Broncos right now at wide receiver, in a private conversation he and I had, he's like, look, the Broncos don't have a lot to boast on at wide receiver in terms of like proven resumes. Outside of Sutton, proven resumes. I mean, even Tim Patrick, he had a proven resume, but now he's been hurt 2 years in a row. So Sutton's the only guy, but what they do have, and it's in spades, is potential. That P word there at the end of Broncos 007's comment. And all it takes, again, is the right coach and quarterback combination to extract that potential. Justin Massey on Facebook. What's up, bro? Great to see you tonight. A longtime listener and member of our community over on Facebook saying, evening, Zach and Chad. It's been a little while since I've caught you live. All good, bro. Last year, Russ took 26 sacks on 3rd and 4th down, and our offense only scored 38 total touchdowns. Assuming Nick starts and only takes half the sacks, how many touchdowns are we talking this year? That's an interesting question. Thank you. Dropping some knowledge here, Zach, with some MINED statistics, which I dig it. 45 total sacks this cat took last year, Russell Wilson. The year prior, 55 sacks. I mean, it's ridiculous. We're talking about, Zach, he was sacked 100 times in 2 years as a Bronco. And then you go, oh, well, the Broncos couldn't protect him. Huff. Well, wait a minute. Let's go back and look at his last 5-6 years in Seattle. The song remains the same. Like the tune, it might have changed key, but it's the same song. And that's another thing that drove Zach, Sean Payton mad. But what's your answer here for Justin?
Well, I don't know that there's correlation and causation here between sacks and touchdowns. So I don't think it's necessarily a guarantee if they take less sacks on 3rd and 4th, they're going to score more touchdowns. It was not just sacks from Russell Wilson and the offensive line. It was the missed open receivers, Chad. It was the incomplete passes that were caused by him scrambling left and right instead of going up in the pocket. There were so many factors, tangible and not, that went into the Broncos' output. My answer has less to do with the sacks and overall, the macro picture. If the offense can be more consistent on the early downs on 1st and 2nd and not put themselves in bad 3rd and 4th down situations, then they'll be more successful that way. They'll score more points that way. They'll win more games that way.
As a compliment to my partner's answer there for you, Justin, I'm going to read a little stretch here of something Sean Payton said in that podcast conversation with Jay Glazer on the Unbreakable podcast. If you guys have not watched that, trust me, especially this time of year where what else you got besides MHH 6 p.m. every night, go check it out. But he's talking about Bo Nix, and he says, quote, I've heard it a million times. Well, first of all, he goes, there was a lot made of his offense, right? The fact that Bo Nix was a system quarterback at Oregon. There was a lot made of his offense. I've heard it a million times. He led college football with the most quick throws. We got it. We understand all that. Then when we analytically remove all the quick throws from every quarterback they scouted, not just Bo Nix, he was still first in his class. Accuracy, touchdowns, all these recordables, sacks. The guy gets rid of the ball. There's so many things that we kept seeing on tape. And then we saw the down the field arm talent, and we're seeing it right now because this was happening during OTAs. So that's a close quote there. Bo Nix, Zach, you're not going to. I mean, I'd be surprised. I predict something around like what do you think, Scott, is the league average? I don't have it in front of me. What's the league average? Probably something like high 20s that they relinquish sacks in a season. Either way, Zach, I predict something approximating with the rookie quarterback half of what Russell Wilson took. Maybe a little bit more, but barely more than half of what Russell did last year. So that means, Zach, just because he avoids the sack on 3rd down doesn't necessarily guarantee that the chains are getting moved, but increases the probability if you're not getting sacks. It's not just sack, losing the yardage, punt. In Russell's case, it was sack, ball comes out, team recovers. Now you're on defense trying to defend a short field. That kind of thing kept really biting the Broncos in the rear end.
And to be fair, in Russell Wilson's defense, it wasn't just Wilson that was at fault. The offensive line was not good in the running game, Chad. And I brought up 1st and 2nd down. Well, they couldn't make any hay on 1st and 2nd down and put themselves in 3rd and 10 and 3rd and 12 and 3rd and 14. More often than not, when you're in those situations and you're forced to pass, you're going to have a negative play, either a sack, incompletion, pressure, what have you. But if you can set up a 2nd and 1 or a 3rd and 2 and you can run the ball effectively, your quarterback doesn't have to drop back and pass. It limits the potential to take sacks. So it's all simpatico with the quarterback, the running game, and the offensive line. All of those three have to be better in 2024.
No doubt, but I still think it boils down to quarterback, because one of the reasons why, and I'm not trying to take any onus off the O-line. Those guys, it's on them to definitely raise their level of play. But like when we saw this, that whole 2011 season, right, with Tim Tebow and the Broncos, when John Fox, under direction from John Elway, finally was like, all right, we're going to play this Tebow kid. And man, it was ugly. Zach, you remember even watching from afar, if you were not on the beat, like it would be literally 3 quarters and 10 minutes of utter horse what football, where the opposing defense would just load the box. They'd basically crowd the receivers, load the box, leave one little single high guy who's not too far back, and just say, what are you going to do? And the Broncos still, at that point, Zach, managed to, because Tebow was an animal, finish as the number 1 rushing offense in the NFL. But the similar plight affected the Broncos last year under Russell Wilson, where they just would load the box. And it's like, well, you want to see more production out of your O-line and your running backs on first and second down. Yes. But until Russell Wilson, which this is another reason why he's not here anymore, until Russell Wilson could make them pay for doing those things and actually complete passes and get some gas yards on first and second down when Sean Payton would try to make them pay, right? It's not like Sean Payton just took it on the chin. It was like, hey, I'm going to make my offense a sacrificial lamb. Go ahead and have your way with this. He would try to counter. He would try and make them pay, and Russ just couldn't do it. And that was another frustrating component, Zach.
You're right, but that same thing is going to happen with Bo Nix under center, Chad. I mean, NFL defenses see a rookie quarterback and they're going to say, hey, make him beat us and then we'll respect him. I would not be surprised if in his first game he gets shown a 0 blitz on the first snap, just to show that, listen, this is the big boys, this is the NFL, and you're going to have to earn every down.
Well, it's kind of like Super Bowl 50. Now, it's maybe a little apples and oranges comparison here, but that Carolina defense that year, 2015, was legit. And one of their calling cards was that double A-gap blitz from the linebackers, where they'd send Luke Kuechly, and I forget who his partner was next to him. And so just to kind of maybe they're hoping that Peyton Manning, still seeing ghosts from that 2 years prior Super Bowl 48 beatdown, first play of the game, they throw that linebacker blitz at him. And this time he's aware, he's alert, boom, makes him pay for it. It's a nice completion to Owen Daniels, moving the chains on first down. And right there in that moment, they made him pay. Was it like changed the game in terms of the scoreboard or anything? No, but it set the tone and really did keep momentum literally from the first play on Denver's side. That's how important it is. You're right. They're going to flood the zone. They're going to try and test Bo Nix. Will he be able to make him pay? And that's going to dictate, Zach, when Sean Payton goes, okay, this is what they're doing to us. All right, Rook, you ready? We're going to try and make him pay on this set of downs on first or second down or whatever. If Bo Nix can make him pay a couple of times, then they're going to start easing back. And then all of a sudden the world's your oyster, because you can run the ball, you can still throw, you can do your thing. Phil, let's shift gears though here. Phil says, hey, if, and it's a big if, Greg Dulcich, tight end, stays healthy, do we see him, Zach, as a Pro Bowler?
That's a little bit of a stretch there. I think he's closer to becoming a professional bowler, because the NFL is not working out, than he is an NFL Pro Bowler. He cannot even stay healthy, Chad. He cannot participate in off-season practices. He's iffy for training camp right now. I mean, let's let him get on the field and beat out Adam Troutman and Lucas Kroll and then go from there. I think he could be a solid starter, Phil, in a Sean Payton offense, but Pro Bowler, pump the brakes.
And if bowling doesn't work out, he could go start a Weird Al cover band, and Weird Al's a cover.
He's got some options for sure.
But I guess I picked the wrong day to not wear my Big Lebowski t-shirt with the dude, like with the bowling thing. That joke got me. But I'm going to take the optimistic approach here, Phil, and let's just say assume he stays healthy. If he gets on the field and stays healthy, again, it's tied back to kind of the whole chicken or the egg thing relative to quarterback. If Bo Nix is who Sean Payton thinks he is, and even if he's not like Drew Brees 2006, 2007, 8, and 9, where he's like just lighting it up, all pro style, but at least is that competent, Zach, extension of Sean Payton on the field. Ball's going where it needs to go. Maybe you're lacking some of the explosives. Maybe you're a little bit more conservative as a rule, because he is a rookie. All those things that come into play, big picture. If he is even approaching that vision that the Broncos saw when they were drafting him, then it's definitely possible that Dulcich will stack some stuff. But that if, man, there's two ifs here. If he stays healthy, that's a big if for Dulcich, and if Bo Nix is that guy. And there's another if he sees the field sooner than later. But that's where we're at. We're in the season of ifs, Zach, and there's only 2 weeks really left till we actually have something happening every day with which we can kind of sink our teeth into.
Yeah, we'll get to Howie. I would want to add one point that I've made before about tight ends. In New Orleans, and correct me if I'm wrong, Sean Payton never had a premier except for Jimmy Graham. I mean, who else was Benjamin Watson? Who else was a true elite established premier tight end? He had the Taysom Hill types, the Chris Manhertz types, the Adam Troutman types. So I don't think you necessarily need a Pro Bowler at tight end for Sean Payton's offense to work. Just want to put that out there.
I do remember like the final days of the Jeremy Shockey era as a
He
player.
was lost at that point, though.
But that was like early Peyton. That was before his offense really became what it became, if memory serves. But man, that's going back almost 20 years trying to remember all that stuff. Howie, bro, thank you. So good to see you, big dog. He says 30 days-ish till kickoff for the preseason game 1. What do you guys think? Who do you guys think starts the first preseason game?
Man.
And then what's the rotation going forward? Hashtag Buckham, Knicks 46, Knicks 46, hashtag bonus. The way things are trending, Zach, I would be stunned if, as Mike Kliss still likes to posture him, as late as whatever it was, Monday, Tuesday, starting quarterback, Denver Broncos starting quarterback, Jarrett Stidham. That's the message that's being sent out to the guys closest to the team. So I think he will be the preseason game 1 starter. The question is, again, like, hey, how does that rotation work? How he's talking about here, Zach, i.e., who then starts game 2, who then starts game 3, etc. What say you?
Well, because Sean Payton wants an open competition, so he says, I don't think that Bo Nix has enough time to beat out Stidham, no doubt about it, before the first preseason game. So I tend to agree with you, Chad, that Stidham will start game 1 and maybe get a quarter of play, and then Bo Nix will get the second quarter, and then Zach Wilson gets the second half. And then going forward, the second preseason game, I would expect Bo Nix to start that game, and then they reverse the order. And then maybe if there's a game 3 in terms of the quarterback competition, maybe they all 3 get first team reps and then decide. But I would hope, Chad, by at some point in the preseason, Bo Nix is the unquestioned starter and they name him as such.
Well said. Keith, what's up, big dog? Up in Montana. So good to see you. Saying, hey, Chad and Zach, how do you measure a successful Bo Nix season? That's a really good question. I'll start it off real fast here, Zach. He sees the field by the time the first quarter of the season is in the books. So he's on the field. It could be game 1 to, week 3, week 4, what have you. I still break it down by quarters, even though thanks NFL, we no longer have even arithmetic on that front, but still he's on the field in the first quarter of the season. And I don't really tie it as an absolute, Zach, to the standings. I tie it to, is that offense look like what we know Sean Payton's offenses looked like all those years in New Orleans? Like, is he coming along? I use this phrase again. I think it's the 3rd time tonight I've used it, but is he really showing himself, Zach, to be that extension of Sean Payton on the field? Because if he is, I'm telling you guys right now, it's only a matter of time before everything else, the Bronco universe kind of snaps around that, and it does start translating to wins and losses. But I'll say this. I'll say Bo Nix is a minimum 75% of the game starter, and I'm not really even tying it to wins, but let's just say hovers around 500. That to me would be a successful year 1 for Bo Nix.
I was going to say the one thing I'm not determining it by is wins and losses. I want to see development, and I want to have moments throughout the year, Chad. There's going to be bumps and bruises. There are going to be peaks and valleys. That goes along with any rookie quarterback. But I want to have a few moments, hopefully more than a few, throughout the season where I say to myself, he has it. There's something about him where he is the guy. And I want the Broncos to at least win one game because of him. Not in spite of him, because of him. I want him to be the tide that raises everyone. So again, if they finish the season 5-12, but Bo Nix looks like the guy, or he's trending in the right direction, that is a successful season. But if they go somehow 10-7, where they're carrying Bo Nix through the year like Peyton Manning in 2015, that wouldn't be a success for me. It's not about wins and losses in 2024. It's about Bo Nix and how he progresses for the next decade.
I want to see some of those games too, where he is the reason why they're winning. Like, we think back to the high hopes, Zach, that we had for Drew Lock, right? Like that rookie year, was it Houston? Where he had the 3 touchdowns. Yeah, it was that Houston game. And then he had that one Carolina game where it was either 3 or 4 touchdowns. He only had 2 truly signature games in however many games he started as a Bronco before Vic Fangio kind of pulled the plug and ushered in Teddy Bridgewater. That's not enough. You need to have it. First of all, you need to be like the guy leading the charge week in and week out. If you have a great game, you're going to win the game. If you end up not doing so well with this roster as it stands, you're probably going to lose the game. But I want to see some of those. Like, we could point to 2 games for Drew Lock, dude. That Houston game. There's 1 or 2 more maybe that approach it, but really, like, that come to mind. 2 games for Drew Lock. The last kind of young drafted quarterback that was tapped with the hopes of everybody as being the future guy. That needs to be like every other game. That's the level of NFL nowadays, Zach. Like, you can't just be a 1 touchdown, 1 interception, 180 yards guy and expect the needle to be moved in the standings.
Yeah, and Keith following up saying, what does a successful second year look like for Bo Nix? And by the second year, the pressure is really on. If he's trending in the right direction, kind of like CJ Stroud now, everyone is going to expect the Houston Texans to win that division and go deep into the playoffs because of the year 1 success that he had. If Bo Nix progresses into the guy, the expectation for successful should be playoffs. It should be 10 wins or more with Sean Payton in his 3rd year in 2025.
Well said. I love it. Guys, we are nearing the what's up, Pro? Great to see you. Hope you're doing well on Facebook. Not a lot other than the topics we've gotten to already tonight that we needed to get to. So any burning topics, questions, get them in the chat, and we'll do our best to get to them here before we dip on out. But I'm just telling you right now, we're pretty close. Zach, I wanted to get your thoughts on this at the risk of the website playing a video that I had previously muted once again. I wanted to get your thoughts on Trevor Sikkema of Pro Football Focus. He was talking about what's the greatest move the Broncos made this offseason, and he pointed to releasing Russell Wilson, replacing him with Bo Nix, which you might go, well, wait a minute. PFF's been panning the Broncos draft class, hasn't been able to say word one positive about Bo Nix. But in the case of Sikkema, you're kind of barking up the wrong tree because he gave the Broncos draft class, and he's kind of their key draft guy. He gave him an A- for the draft haul at the time. And even though he was a kind of slightly Bo Nix skeptic, he could kind of smell what Sean Payton was cooking. He can understand what he had in mind. But this is what he said, Zach, in explaining the Broncos' best decision of the 2024 offseason. Quote, yes, taking on a combined dead cap hit of $85 million to have one player not play for your franchise was the Broncos' best move. Denver bit the bullet in cutting ties with the underperforming Russell Wilson and then tried to make the most of things by securing a first-round rookie quarterback on a cost-controlled salary with a fifth-year option. The Broncos made other solid moves this offseason, but the best was simply, Zach, moving on from Wilson. Close quote. Your thoughts?
So it was drafting Bo Nix or moving on from Russ. That was the best move.
Well, it's funny because the way he headlines it,
he brings up Zach Wilson.
Out with Russell Wilson, in with Bo Nix. But the way he then explained it, he centered on just the fact that you moved on from Russ.
Well, I was going to give him credit for bringing up Bo Nix, but I think it's just another way to clown the Broncos for the Russell Wilson disaster. That's kind of how I took it, Chad. And if he would have said drafting Bo Nix would have been the best move, I would have agreed with that. It all starts and ends with the quarterback. I like the Brandon Jones signing, for example. I love the Jim Leonard hiring, for example, but nothing is greater or of more importance than drafting Bo Nix. But I guess moving on from Russ was the prelude to that.
For what it's worth, here is what Sikkema wrote about. This was like his bottom line on the Broncos drafting Bo Nix. This was May 8th that he wrote it. Quote, Nix's experience manifests in the form of pre-snap reads, play under pressure, and avoiding negatives. His footwork needs to be more disciplined, and he will take some time to really read progressions better in the NFL. But he is a quarterback with starting caliber tools in his arm and his legs with added out of structure playmaking, close quote. So, again, okay, then where's the skepticism come from then? You tell me that, I'm going, yeah, that sounds like a quarterback that definitely has some franchise caliber tools. Why the skepticism? It's because, as to quote Sean Payton, Zach, going back to that Jay Glazer interview or conversation, more like, talks about the NFL train and these tropes and these different kind of talking points get built up, and then they kind of become bugaboos, and then it even reaches so far, it can start in the fan base, matriculate to media. It can still end up in an NFL front office, but pretty soon it becomes groupthink. And that's just kind of the book on somebody until that somebody, proves it wrong.
That's pervaded every level of our society, Chad, from football and to politics and everything else, is that these cult-like narratives begin to form. Just like, for example, Bo Nix can't throw deep. Bo Nix can't do this. Bo Nix can't do that. But if you put on the tape and you watch the Oregon film, Bo Nix can throw deep. Bo Nix can do everything that you want a potential franchise quarterback to do. So that's where the skepticism came in, is because a group of 10 or 15 national media types, blue check marks on Twitter, said Bo Nix is number 6 quarterback in this draft and he's no good. Well, they're going to eat their crow very soon.
Indeed, guys. Great conversation. We've gone, by the time we're out of here, it's going to be like 50 minutes on a Thursday in the middle of July. So kudos to you guys. Thank you for being here for us. We got a couple messages for you, though, before we dip, so don't leave quite yet.
Tremendous episode, as always, of the Mile High Huddle podcast. If you're not doing so, please follow us on Twitter at the MHH Pod. You can follow the main account on Twitter at Mile High Huddle. Chad at Chad and Jensen, myself at Kelberman NFL, and Scott, our producer, at Scout Kennedy. If you guys want some merch like we're rocking each and every podcast, check out mhhmerch.com. Get you some. If you haven't done so yet, please drop us a like at facebook.com/Mile High Huddle Pod. You can find us on IG at mile_high_huddle. If you're listening on Apple Podcasts, make sure you're leaving your Football Priest a 5-star review for a chance to win some merch each and every single month. But if anything, y'all, please subscribe, like, and share this video and every video you see on the MHH channel. It really helps us grow and reach more Broncos fans just like you.
A mile-high salute to the great Super Chat superstars and supporters tonight, helping us keep the lights on. We got the Papa Bear, David McElrath. We got Taylor Christensen. We got the Ronk. We got Arnold Serrano in the house. We got Sam Bam twice. We got Phil more than once as well. McLaughlin. We got Mike Edel. We got George Fox. We got the Broncos football spy himself, Broncos 007. Justin Massey. We got also Howie Frickin' Day in the frickin' house. And last but certainly not least, Keith Brugman. Love you guys. Thank you so much. Enjoy your weekend. Zach and I will be back in the saddle Sunday night. Can't wait.
Have a great start to your weekend. We'll see you Sunday. Take care. And as always, go Broncos.